IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I am your host Saurabh Todi, and I have with me my colleague Shambhavi Nayak. Today we are going to discuss a very exciting news that has come from China, that scientists in a trial have been able to restore hearing of children who were born deaf. So, first of all, a very warm welcome, Shambhavi. This is such a great news. I'm quite excited to talk about this.
Yeah, thanks, Saurabh. Yeah, I saw that video of that 6-year-old child and her mother, and in which she was born deaf, the child, and was struggling at school. So at nap time, the other kids had to wake her up because she could not hear the chime of the bells to wake up. And then now that she has been enrolled since last December, and now that some of her hearing has been restored, she is learning to speak, and she can now hear the chime. She's not dependent on her classmates to wake her up, and it's just very heartwarming to see what gene therapy can achieve when applied, to help disease alleviation. So it's fantastic. In the world of current crisis, I think it is just nice to know that there are good things also happening.
I completely agree. So, for our listeners, so can you kind of explain what exactly has happened?
Right.
And
Yeah, so this is studies that has been carried out at the Fudan University in Shanghai. There's a parallel study also going on by the company Regeneron in the US. They are looking at a particular type of deafness, so not all deafness, a particular type of deafness which is caused because of a defect in a protein called otoferlin. Okay, and this I think is just testament to the complexity that is human body. Otoferlin is a little tiny transmembrane protein that exists in the hair cells of the inner ear. Okay, and there are only 16,000 or so of these cells. And this tiny protein basically makes sure that these hair cells can communicate with the passage of sound to the next thing in the circuit. Okay, and if the otoferlin is absent or is not working, sound doesn't transmit from the inner hair cells to the brain, right, which hears. And I think it's just amazing that there's so many things that have to be right for you to hear, and I mean, forget about all of the other diverse things that human body is supposed to do. So the absence of otoferlin, a functioning copy of otoferlin, basically renders these children deaf since birth. It is actually quite rare, happens in only 1 to 3% of deafness cases. And the absence of the gene basically means that the child can't hear. And so what these studies have been trying to do is trying to put back that otoferlin, a functioning copy, using a DNA virus. Virus is a harmless virus which is not going to cause you infection, but will deliver this copy of the functioning copy of otoferlin. The otoferlin is then expressed within the cells and starts working, and it is basically connecting you have a Lego set of which there is a missing part, and you're connecting that part, right? And then suddenly the entire thing works. So that is at the crux of it, what people have been trying to do. These experiments have been first carried out in mice, obviously. So they created models in mice which could replicate the absence of otoferlin, and then they tried to use a virus to deliver it back so it worked. And eventually, after a lot of safety and efficacy trials, we're now doing this in humans. And the first data from the Fudan University studies was presented at a meeting in Europe last week. And it is just excellent. All of the data from the trials seems to suggest that at least a significant part of hearing, not all of it, but a significant part of the hearing is now returning, so the children can actually hear normal conversations, at least, that are occurring. So that's what the study is about. And we'll see what happens next.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable, right? I mean, the idea that you could change something at such a micro level. I mean, you said it's only 16,000 cells. Like, I think we have to understand how small cells are, and only 16,000 of them are the ones that are able to induce deafness. At the same time, only trying to fix these 16,000 cells brings back your hearing, at least for the specific case. So Shambhavi, like how will this impact gene therapies in general? Like, we have had therapies now on trial, and like which have shown some success for color blindness, and now for deafness of obviously some specific cases. But what is the future like? How do you think this news will impact gene therapies in general?
Right. I think first it will boost, I think, investor confidence and, understanding genetics, and understanding the underpinnings of disease and then correcting it. I think one of the most phenomenal thing when I was reading about the study was that, look, it's great that we have fixed it, but even before that, to understand that this is what was causing the disease of everything in the human body and in the human cell, that by itself I think is amazing. And one of the great things that gene editing, CRISPR, etc., will allow us to do is to identify some of the underpinnings for new diseases, right? So I think there should be more confidence in science and the fact that we are discovering and understanding more of human biology with every discovery, right? Second is the idea that if we do find a particular gene that when defective is a single point of causing disease, right, that we might be able to rectify that. I think this is at this point of time also limitations. I think a lot of diseases are caused not by a single gene, right? They are caused because of multiple factors, and alleviating those using gene therapy at this point of time might be a little ambitious. But for those diseases where we have a single mutation, where we understand the gene in action, thalassemia, sickle cell anemia, etc., gene therapies should be should be able to alleviate those. I think this is both for doctors, for scientists, as well as for patient groups to understand of what we are capable of doing currently. Obviously, this will still take a lot of time, even if we do this, but it should I think it should imbibe confidence that gene therapies has a future. And obviously, the only way we actually reach that potential if we put in a lot more money, if we put in a lot more efforts into reaching that, right? One of the things for example, in COVID, we saw that whenever there was demand, everybody, all of these biotech companies got a lot of funding, and the minute COVID stopped, all funding has dried up, and it doesn't work like that in biotech. We need a sustained kind of funding stream. Gestation periods are long, and I hope that this kind of discovery brings in more capacity within venture capitalists, within PE firms to actually support this kind of research. And generally, I think for countries, it should show that, hey, if you do support good research, domestic formulations are possible. So the Fudan University study is a domestically made virus and protocol for recovery of hearing. And similar studies could have been, should be done in other countries as well, India included. And therefore, I think it is a sign to countries that, hey, we need better laws, we need better regulation, and we need to be able to support gene therapies.
Yeah, and I think you raise a very important point that it is a kind of a great morale booster for the community of scientists. At the same time, it can boost confidence of investors, who actually have to put in money into something like this. At the same time, I think gene therapy are a tool. Like they are a tool. So we were only able to do this because we knew the pathway of how this one disease is caused. So we need funding in general to biology as well, and to research teams saying that you have to first understand and figure out what causes a disease, and then you will try to address it. And as you said, there are very few disorders or diseases which are single causal, okay, this is the gene, this is the mutation, you fix that and you fix the disease. So those are low hanging fruits in that case, to kind of address through gene therapies. At the same time, I mean, maybe, we figure out to the course of this research that it may be multi-causal, it may be a group of genes, but this one group of genes, is the most important. And if you fix that, at least you can maybe reduce the suffering, or at least make life slightly better than it was before. So all of this, obviously are very are very important. Like, as you said,
I wanted to make the point that both of us just talk about getting money and the economic benefits of disease alleviation, and I'm actually quite happy about it, because it is something that I think we should underscore. We often talk about this at office, about how biotech is the friend zone technology, and it's even our policies kind of reflect that its altruistic purpose. Oh, it's going to be disease alleviation, yes, but it also going to kind of help bring in money, have economic benefits, and that is also going to be important even for sustaining the sector itself. So yes, in addition to all of the good things it brings to the people that whose suffering is going to alleviate, it will hopefully also bring in money, jobs, etc. For the country.
True, and I think that as long as you don't see biotech as like a sector of economy and something that is as essential as semiconductors or automobiles or garments or even pharma, I mean, we'll not go far enough, right? Because if everything is just altruistic behavior, then it is not, because you need money, and being kind does not bring in enough money. I mean, it has to have a economic benefit. That is when you will get investors and you will get companies, even scientists interested in that, because any technology you may figure out in a lab, but to commercialize it, you need that money and investment and all of that goes into the whole process. So I agree with you completely, and I think, as you said, that this is a breakthrough in China, and then this is the same happening in the US, and there have been success in trials for color blindness and sickle cell in a very small setting. But where does India stand here? I mean, what are the Indian regulations on gene therapy? Are we even on the radar? And how do we regulate gene therapies?
Right. So we do have guidelines for regulation of gene therapies. They came out in 2019. As far as I know, there was one trial being carried out on hemophilia at CMC Vellore. But again, in the Indian context, I think there are two things that are very important to be remembered. Is that in India, government is the primary supporter of a lot of R&D activities. So unless the government decides to invest heavily in creating and trialing gene therapy products, it will be difficult to find private investors for this. We recently had a CAR T cell therapy that was obviously approved for market use. So I guess we are taking more proactive steps when it comes to putting stuff inside the body, cellular stuff inside the body to correct or rectify diseases. The other part is obviously while the regulation exists, it is a little bit unclear because what it allows is for the development of gene therapy for therapeutic benefit. And it doesn't really elaborate on what therapeutic benefit means. And there's a little gray area because because disease or disabilities are also subject to individual understanding. So, for example, when we were actually doing this project on what should India's guidelines for gene editing therapy should be, this was back in 2017, 2018. Our research actually showed that a lot of deaf groups believe that deafness was not a disease and that it should be treated as on par with healthy people. It is just a variation of healthy and therefore should not be grouped as a disease, in which case there is a question of, is treating deafness a therapeutic benefit? And then who defines that therapeutic benefit? And so unless you have clarity on that, building investor confidence into funding research, funding development of trials will be difficult, because if at the end of the day the investor has no, or the scientist has no confidence that the therapy will be approved because somebody sitting somewhere might think that, hey, this doesn't have therapeutic benefit, then what's the point? So I think we need two things. We need stronger governmental support, and we need more clear sort of guidelines on what would be approved, on what basis would be approved, etc. The guidelines did speak about the formation of working groups for individual diseases, which I assume would be, they would identify diseases where gene therapies would be approved of, and then kind of form more detailed guidelines for those, but those haven't come out yet. So we're still waiting to see what kind of stance does the government make on those.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, but I was wondering that, like, the way the research was carried out in China, do our rules allow a similar kind of research to be done in India, or do you think that the rules in India are a bit too restrictive, or do they need to become more of a enabling tool than to like stifle research?
Right. And no, I think so. So technically, that kind of research could have been carried out in India under our current guidelines. Obviously, we have guidelines. We don't have a law. So we could have done that. I think we just need a bit more clarity from the government and funding to be able to identify which diseases should be catered to and work on them. I think the interesting part for if it's a government funded study is whether having a disease which is so rare a good enough starting point, because it is not really going to impact so much of the population. But I think there are enough diseases in India which provide such a big genetic disease burden that if we can even pick a few and say that we are going to kind of have these star campaigns and promote gene editing research or gene therapy research on those particular diseases, I think even that is sufficient. But we need to take a more proactive role into this because now, as more and more countries make these products domestically available, indigenously developed, we don't want to lag behind, because otherwise we will become dependent on other countries to outsource some of our medical needs.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I was just wondering that even if a disease is rare, but if, for example, we know that it has a clear one causal pathway, and we do tend to, like at least figure out a way to cure that disease, then at least the technology wise we would advance. And then maybe in future, when we have more complex pathways or we have more common disorders, we may be able to address them. But yeah, it becomes very difficult to explain to people that it is not always
Right.
that okay, I want to solve sickle cell anemia, so let's just do that. I mean, that is there, but if a very rare disease which only impacts 1 to 2% population might actually hold the key for advancing that technology further, and also 1 or 2% of India's population is still a significant number of people.
And I don't think we should underestimate patient groups at all. When we were doing this research back in 2017-18, this was before India's gene therapy guidelines actually came out. We met a lot of patient groups who were very vocal in demanding that rules be created so that they could actually even start funding, they could start companies, because at the end of the day, it is somebody's life, it is their loved one's life. And these people were willing to make a lot of sacrifices to ensure that there is a therapy that becomes available, if not for their loved one, but at least not other people who are suffering, right? Because again, these therapies will take time to develop. And they have tremendous understanding of what these therapies can achieve. Obviously, it is easy to also, get emotional about it. But they were extremely patient and very informed. So I don't think that we should underestimate their contribution in kind of leading some of the efforts against these diseases, particularly rare diseases. So yeah, I think a bit more help from the government, we might be able to actually support a lot of research in this area.
Yeah. I know. I agree, and I was just wondering that, like, what about broader ethics of this of gene therapy in general, because you have some groups and people saying that this is being too intrusive, this is trying to play God, that you are just like using gene therapies to cure things that you were born with. Like, what is the broader ethics, and how does one navigate in this world where obviously the patient or the patient groups may have one incentive, which is fine. I mean, that is all you need, that if your loved one can be cured, why would you not choose that? But people say that this is being too intrusive, and then there's always a risk of something like this going the wrong way, because there's always a possibility that a technology can be misused. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, gene therapies is quite interesting that way, right? So, and it is, I think it is also unfortunate that sometimes the pendulum oscillates between, hey, this is going to be dangerous and it's going to be the end of the world, or it's going to be a silver bullet and cure everything. And I think truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle. There is, with the current understanding that we have of the human body and gene therapies, there are low-hanging fruits which can possibly help people who are suffering from debilitating diseases. And to not follow those because of some fear of someone's at some point of time using it for something bad, or the fact that it might go against someone's personal beliefs, I find that extremely unethical, that we will hold back medical treatment options for somebody because I might not agree with it because of some personal belief, is something that is unethical for me. There are obviously there are scientific concerns over what can be achieved, and I think that policy has to ensure that any technology that reaches an actual consumer is safe and ready to be used. Right. And after that, if a person doesn't want to use it on themselves because they think that this is going against their belief or their God or their idea of nature, it is their choice. I don't think we should make that choice for people. I think it is unfair, particularly when we cannot offer people support, in terms of public transport in India. For a disabled person to take public transport in India is really difficult. So while we cannot offer them a lot of support services, to also say that we won't be able to support you with medical options, I think it's unfair. What do you think, Saurabh?
I agree, actually. I'm saying that if you are able to, I mean, okay, so I see it in two different ways. That, let's say you have diabetes, right? I mean, you can choose to not take a medication for diabetes because, I don't know, you don't like pills, or you don't want to, you don't believe in allopathy or whatever. But that doesn't mean that because you don't want to treat your diabetes, nobody else should. So I think that's kind of like my broad like theory as well, is that if the cost benefit ratio is not too lopsided in a case, then I think it is imperative that for both the advancement of the science in general and for the betterment of lives of individuals and citizens of a country, research should be funded, and the therapies and regulations should be made which provide an enabling environment for something like this to happen. You can say that, okay, India is a poor country, so we don't have the money to spend on extremely rare diseases. I mean, we can debate about that, but that is an understandable line of argument. But what you should not do is that because the government cannot fund it, you make rules or regulations which disallow or disincentivize anybody else who wants to do that. I think that just makes things worse. If you cannot help, at least make sure that you are not making things worse, right? So that's where I stand.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the classic example of ethics, the issues of gene editing is then our neighbor China. I mean, a lot of this global understanding and attention to gene editing started when this Chinese scientist made genetically edited babies, and the world took them down. The Chinese Academy of Sciences had to suspend him and etc. There was a lot of aftermath of that. But now we have another study coming out of China, which everybody is saying is really good because it aligns with global values. But that is going to be interesting for us to see, because China will now start pushing at global values the more it does this work. And India really has to catch up, because otherwise we'll have other countries setting up our own ethical narratives.
I agree, and I think it is also quite interesting that, I mean, obviously China is a innovation powerhouse in many ways, but especially in the field of biotechnology and medical science, significant advancements, at least at the research stage, have been made in China. And I mean, given that China is an adversary of India, or at least we would be competing with China on many forums, I think it is quite concerning that, I mean, it's good that these developments are happening in China, but they're not happening in India. And so we would end up being like a rule taker again, right? We'll not be a rule maker. So West already has access to all of these, and they also make all these rules, and they obviously have a significantly advanced research and development ecosystem. So on both sides, we are just the bystander. So I think that is something that needs to be addressed. And unfortunately, I think research in basic sciences and R&D has been something that has been a perennial problem in India, and somewhat it is. Sometimes I'm optimistic because we have the National Research Foundation now. Hopefully that is going to change something, or things will happen. But at least in basic research, it seems like we are not thinking broadly and ambitiously enough.
Yeah, I agree. As reflects in our funding for R&D, we do need to increase it substantially. Not just the amount of money, but the way it is spent. And let's see what NRF can do to be the game changer. We're still waiting for the rules and understanding of how it's going to operate. But I guess it just shows that there are a lot of opportunities for us to innovate. And hopefully we will take these cues coming from outside of India and work on our own ecosystems.
Yeah, no, I second that. And hopefully we would have many more podcasts like this where we talk about good, optimistic things that are happening. As you said, in a world where quite substantial amount of things are going wrong and this carnage every day for some or the other reason, I think these are few kind of, specks of light which helps you keep forward that, okay, the humanity as a whole is advancing and then things are being better for many, many people. So thanks a lot, Shambhavi.
Thanks, sir. Thank you for listening, everyone.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.